He was kicked out of his own hotel without even being asked who he was. But a few minutes later, he returned and changed the fate of the entire staff forever. Subscribe and write which city you are from. A silver sedan pulled up in front of the Grand Royal Hotel, its polished body absorbing the early morning light that filtered through the glass towers of downtown. The driver, dressed in a sharp black suit and leather gloves, stepped out silently, circling the vehicle with practiced ease. With a subtle nod, he opened the rear door. From within, a man emerged. Tall, broad-shouldered, his dark skin glowing faintly beneath the gray city sky. He wore a faded pair of jeans, slightly frayed at the hem, an unbranded navy windbreaker zipped halfway up, and a pair of old scuffed sneakers. His posture was casual, his movements unhurried. On a first glance, he looked like any ordinary man passing through the city. But there was nothing ordinary about Marcus Holloway. He paused on the sidewalk, his eyes scanning the ornate facade of the hotel he had purchased just 6 weeks prior. A luxurious, high-end property nestled between foreign embassies, elite banks, and the sort of boutiques that didn't bother to place price tags in their windows. The Grand Royal was a jewel in the city's hospitality crown, with marble columns, crystal chandeliers, visible through the glass entrance, and a reputation for discreet excellence. At least that was the phrase they marketed. Marcus was here to test if those words had any weight, not from a conference room or an executive suite, but as a guest no one recognized. He gave a brief nod to his driver, who returned to the car without question and then stepped forward. The hotel's automated sliding doors whooshed open with a polite sigh. Inside, the lobby greeted him with a temperature-controlled breeze, the scent of white lilies drifting from the central floral arrangement. Light from a sprawling skylight high above played across the polished stone floor, refracting off golden inlays and Art Deco fixtures. The concierge desk sat off to the left, manned by a tall man in a dark blue blazer, flipping through a leather-bound guest registry. The moment Marcus entered, the atmosphere shifted. Not dramatically, not overtly, but noticeably. The concierge glanced up, his eyes flicking over Marcus's attire. There was no greeting, no smile, just a subtle raising of one brow before he returned to his book. Marcus continued walking slowly through the lobby, his steps echoing faintly. On the far side, a middle-aged couple in designer clothing was being warmly welcomed by another staff member. Flutes of champagne were being offered on a silver tray. The contrast was immediate and jarring. He approached the front desk. A young woman with perfectly tied-back blonde hair and an expression of rehearsed politeness looked up from her computer. "Yes?" she asked curtly. Marcus returned her gaze, friendly and calm. "Good morning. I was hoping to inquire about availability." She didn't answer right away. Her fingers remained poised over the keyboard, but she didn't type. "We're fully booked," she said. Her voice lacked inflection. "That's unfortunate," Marcus said gently. "Even for a single night?" She glanced at the screen, tapped once, then back at him. "Yes, unfortunately. We're hosting a conference. There's no availability." Marcus nodded, unbothered. "Is it possible to have a look around the hotel? I heard a lot about the design and wanted to see it for myself before making plans for the future." She hesitated, then tilted her head slightly. "We normally don't allow walk-ins to browse the premises," she replied. "But if you're brief, fine." He smiled and gave a soft "thank you," then stepped aside. She did not return the smile. Marcus took his time, walking across the lobby, absorbing every detail, not just of the decor, but of the people, how the staff interacted with different guests, how their posture changed depending on who approached, the shallow nods, the careful smiles, the way laughter seemed to die when someone unexpected entered the room. He sat down in one of the lounge chairs near the front windows, pulling out his phone. He wasn't using it. He simply observed. A waitress walked past with a tray of espressos and pastries, slowing briefly as she noticed him, then picking up speed, avoiding eye contact. A family of tourists entered, white, well-dressed, carrying Louis Vuitton luggage, and immediately a bellboy rushed to assist. Marcus remained invisible. 10 minutes passed, then 20. No one asked him if he needed help. No one offered water. No one smiled. And then she arrived. Linda Caldwell. He had studied her file thoroughly before the visit. The general manager of the property for 8 years, responsible for the hotel's daily operations. Her reputation on paper was spotless. High-performing, efficient, always composed. But beneath the polished metrics and sanitized HR reviews, there had been whispers, allegations that never stuck. Discreet complaints settled quickly. Marcus had read them all. He wanted to see her with his own eyes. Linda walked briskly across the lobby, clipboard in hand, tailored suit impeccable, heels clicking. Her hair was coiled tightly in a sleek bun. Her sharp eyes scanned the lobby until they landed on Marcus. She stopped mid-step. Her face shifted, barely perceptibly, into a hardened mask. She turned and made a direct path toward him. "Excuse me, sir," she said with a forced smile that never reached her eyes. "Are you a guest here?" Marcus looked up calmly. "Not yet." She pursed her lips. "This lounge area is for registered guests only. I'll have to ask you to leave." "Sorry, I spoke to the front desk," he replied, still polite. "They gave me permission to look around." Linda's smile vanished. "You must have misunderstood. We're a private property. I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to exit the lobby." Her tone was clipped, cold. She didn't shout, but her voice was raised just enough to attract attention. Marcus stood, still composed. "May I ask your name?" "I'm the general manager," she replied, clearly not used to being questioned. "And I'd like you to leave now." Marcus didn't move. That was enough for her. She turned slightly and pressed a small button under the reception counter, the panic alert for unruly individuals. 2 security guards appeared moments later, emerging from a side hallway. Broad-chested, suited in dark gray, they flanked Marcus within seconds. "We need you to come with us," one said flatly. Whispers began to ripple through the lobby. Guests looked up from their drinks. A woman pulled out her phone and began filming discreetly. A businessman at the bar muttered something under his breath, shaking his head in disapproval, not at the injustice, but at Marcus. "This is private property," Linda said louder now. "We maintain standards here. I'm sure you understand." One of the guards took Marcus by the arm. He didn't resist. His expression remained unreadable as he was escorted toward the glass doors, his sneakers squeaking lightly on the marble. The guests stared. One laughed under his breath. A man in a blazer smirked, whispering to his wife. No one intervened. The doors opened, and Marcus stepped outside. He stood still for a moment beneath the street lamp, the city noise humming faintly in the background. The light above cast a golden hue over his calm features. Then he pulled out his phone, pressed a single button, and brought it to his ear. "It's time," he said. "Prepare the board. Call the press. We go live in 20. He ended the call, pocketed the phone, and turned back toward the doors. His reflection waited for him in the glass, steady, quiet, and composed. And this time, the doors would open for a very different man. The night air still lingered in the wake of Marcus Holloway's quiet departure. Inside the Grand Royal, conversation slowly resumed, though the undertone of curiosity remained palpable. A few guests continued whispering, glancing toward the glass doors, where only moments ago a man had been publicly removed by security. Most had already returned to their drinks or digital distractions, indifferent or unaware of the storm that was about to unfold. Exactly 20 minutes later, the rhythm of the lobby shifted once more. This time it wasn't subtle. The hush began not with words but with silence, unnatural, instant. The automatic doors opened again, and Marcus stepped through, the same man, the same steady posture, but now a presence that weighed differently in the air. He was still dressed plainly. No luxury watch, no tailored coat, but something had changed. Behind him trailed 2 men and a woman, their dark suits crisp, their expressions focused. One held a slim briefcase, the other carried a tablet. They moved with practiced precision, scanning the room as if it were a stage. Marcus walked purposefully, his steps echoing against the marble. The guests who had laughed earlier straightened in their seats. Phones buzzed in hands as alerts from news apps began to pour in. The headlines appeared one after the other, nearly in unison. Marcus Holloway finalizes acquisition of Grand Royal Hotel Group. Images of Marcus from previous business events flashed across screens. His name was suddenly everywhere. At the front desk, the young receptionist who had earlier denied him information froze, her mouth slightly open, her hand trembling near the keyboard. The concierge, previously aloof, now stood at attention, his face pale, eyes wide. Even the bellboy, who had rushed to assist another guest before, hesitated in the hallway, unsure whether to approach or retreat. Linda Caldwell emerged from her office, clipboard in hand. She was smiling, but her smile was tight, brittle. It was the expression of a woman trying to reclaim control of a room that no longer belonged to her. She moved toward Marcus quickly, her heels striking the marble like gunshots. "Mr. Holloway," she said brightly, stopping in front of him. "What a surprise! Marcus looked at her for a moment, then past her. He turned to one of the men behind him and nodded. A portable podium was wheeled out from the side by hotel staff, who had suddenly appeared from the shadows. A microphone was attached and adjusted. 2 folding tripods were set up quickly by the woman in the group, who connected a small camera feed to a waiting tablet. The other man opened the briefcase and produced a slim black folder. The lobby had transformed into a stage. Guests watched, phones raised. The ones who had laughed now watched in stiff silence. Some guests had begun live streaming. Others whispered as if afraid to speak too loudly in the presence of something bigger than themselves. Marcus stepped up to the podium. "Good evening," he said, voice calm, rich with quiet authority. "My name is Marcus Holloway. As of this morning, I am the principal owner of the Grand Royal Hotel Group, which includes this property and all those that bear its name." There were audible gasps, mostly from staff, some from the guests. A few employees glanced nervously at Linda, who stood motionless just behind him. "I arrived tonight," Marcus continued, "under the assumption that hospitality, true hospitality, is not a luxury reserved for a few, but a standard upheld for all. I came here not as an executive, not as a name on a headline, but as a man seeking to observe, to listen, to understand." He paused. Not a sound interrupted the room. "And what I experienced," he said, letting the words settle, "was not hospitality. It was exclusion, judgment, dismissal. By a team trained, I presume, to offer service without bias. But the service I received tonight revealed something else, a pattern I've seen reported, documented, but until now had not witnessed firsthand." Marcus turned to the woman beside him, who handed him a thin tablet. He tapped the screen, and behind him, a previously dark monitor flickered to life. An internal report appeared, formatted, time-stamped, official. "Over the past 18 months," he said, "we have collected data across all Grand Royal properties. This location has received the highest number of internal discrimination complaints within our network. 47 to be exact, from guests, from staff, from contractors." A murmur stirred the crowd. Marcus scrolled, each swipe of his finger revealing more. The camera zoomed in for those watching live. 5 formal complaints were settled through non-disclosure agreements and financial compensation. 3 involved allegations of racial profiling. 2 of those cases occurred under this management. He paused again, meeting the gaze of those standing before him. "The most common name attached to those complaints," he said quietly, "is the general manager of this hotel." Gasps became more pronounced now. A woman seated near the front covered her mouth. A man near the bar lowered his phone, ashamed. "I want to be clear," Marcus continued. "This is not a moment of vengeance. This is a moment of accountability. And for those watching staff, guests, citizens who've been told their presence does not fit the standard, let this moment speak louder than any statement our brand has ever issued." Behind Marcus, the screen shifted to a graph displaying complaint frequency, overlaid with dates and internal HR summaries. Several dots were highlighted in red. Linda stepped forward then, her voice trembling slightly but still coded in professionalism. "Mr. Holloway, if I may, there must be a misunderstanding. I've served this property with the utmost dedication. Any accusations?" Marcus didn't look at her. He turned instead to the third man in his group, who stepped forward and connected a wireless keyboard to the large monitor. A staff interface opened. The screen now displayed the hotel's internal system, and on it, Linda's profile. "Your actions tonight confirm what the data only implied," Marcus said. "You did not fail in a moment. You failed over years, through patterns, through choices. The technician selected her profile and tapped a button labeled Terminate. A confirmation message appeared, followed by another. Linda's name vanished from the employee directory. There was no applause, no cheer, only the sound of a digital removal followed by a long, uncomfortable silence. She remained standing, lips parted, a flush creeping up her neck. Marcus stepped away from the podium, the quiet still clinging to him. Then he turned to a young man standing behind the reception desk, a junior administrator whose nervousness earlier had not gone unnoticed. "You," Marcus said, addressing him directly. "Your name?" "Daniel," the young man replied, startled. Marcus nodded. "You hesitated earlier. I saw it. You recognized that something wasn't right. That's courage. Silent, but real. From this moment forward, you're the acting general manager." Daniel blinked, stunned. Around him, the remaining staff looked at one another in disbelief. "Lead well," Marcus said simply, then turned back to the room. "Tonight," he concluded, "marks a turning point, not just for this property, but for every hotel that bears our name. We will not be a brand known for exclusion. We will not tolerate bias masquerading as policy. Every guest, every employee, every human being who walks through these doors deserves dignity." With that, he stepped down from the podium. No one spoke, not because they were afraid, but because the moment didn't require it. The truth had been spoken. The power had shifted. The reckoning had begun. The news cameras captured every second. Within moments, the footage would begin to circle the globe, and Marcus Holloway, in silence, walked across the same lobby where he had been shamed not 30 minutes earlier, leaving behind not vengeance but change. The echoes of Marcus's final words still lingered in the vast lobby like the aftershock of an earthquake. Though he had stepped down from the impromptu podium and moved away from the crowd, the weight of his presence remained. No one reached for another drink. No one returned to idle chatter. The air hung thick with anticipation, as if the entire hotel had been reset, its illusions of elegance and grace stripped bare by a quiet confrontation that proved far more devastating than any display of outrage could have achieved. Linda stood still, her posture locked in a strange stiffness between defiance and disbelief. The emptiness on the screen where her name had once appeared seemed more final than a shouted dismissal. No longer the manager, no longer untouchable, yet she hadn't left. Whether it was denial or simple paralysis, no one could say. She looked around as though expecting anyone to speak on her behalf, but the silence from her own team spoke louder than words. And then, from the shadows of the service hallway near the restaurant entrance, a soft voice broke through. "I saw what she did to Mr. Holloway," the woman said, stepping cautiously into view. She was small, with her dark hair pinned in a simple clip, her uniform crisp but worn at the elbows. Her name tag read Elena. The delicate tray she carried trembled in her hands. She looked down for a moment, then raised her chin, her voice steadier now. "I was standing near the corridor when she ordered security. She didn't ask his name. She didn't check if he was on the list. She didn't care. She saw his skin and decided who he was." A murmur passed through the crowd. Marcus turned slightly, giving the young woman his full attention. So did the cameras. Linda's face contorted. "That's not true," she said sharply, her voice regaining some of its force. "You don't know the protocols?" "I know how you talk," Elena said, interrupting. "How you whisper when certain guests arrive. How you tell us to watch them closely, or remind us which tables to avoid if we don't want trouble. I know how you told me not to speak Spanish in the back corridors because it made us look less professional." Aha! Elena's words struck like cracks in a dam, and once the first fissure appeared, the wall of silence began to break. "I remember that," said another voice. It came from a tall man in a server's vest, who had emerged from the bar area, removing his apron as he stepped forward. "Last month, you wrote me up for being late when I had already cleared it with another manager. Said I was unreliable. But you didn't say anything when John came in 30 minutes late the next day. You even smiled at him." Linda's hands were clenched now. Her eyes darted to the exits, to the press, to Marcus, but no rescue was coming. A third voice joined in. This one from a man in a dark suit who had been silently standing behind the concierge desk. His voice was quiet but firm. 2 years ago, a guest called the front desk to complain about loud music from the suite next door. You told me not to do anything because the complaint was about a regular. The next day, when a guest with a foreign accent called about the same issue, you sent security immediately. You told them to give a formal warning. I was ordered not to write anything down. The confessions continued, one after another. What had started as a murmur became a rising tide. Former silences found voices, and those voices refused to be silenced again. I was told not to look guests in the eye, not certain guests, just the ones who weren't appropriate. She docked my tips because a guest complimented me instead of her favorite server. She said I should straighten my hair if I wanted to be taken seriously. Each sentence peeled away another layer of veneer from the hotel's perfect exterior, revealing what had long simmered beneath the polished marble and gold accents. The guests who had once watched Marcus's removal in amusement or apathy now shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some of them staring at the floor, others at their phones, unsure whether to continue filming or to finally put the devices away. A moment of particular gravity came when an older man, distinguished in a charcoal suit, stepped forward from a group of guests. His beard was trimmed neatly, his bearing composed, and his voice carried an unexpected weight. I was here last year, he began, with my daughter. She's adopted. Her mother and I raised her in New England. Her skin is darker than mine. At the check-in desk, I handed over our passports, and your receptionist looked directly at her and asked if she was our translator. When I corrected her, she didn't apologize, just stared. We were placed in a room next to the staff elevators. The entire weekend, we were treated like strangers at a party we weren't invited to. Ainam, the man turned to Marcus, eyes glassy with emotion. I didn't complain. I thought maybe I was imagining it. I didn't want to make a scene in front of my daughter. But she noticed. She said, "Daddy, why don't they like me?" The silence that followed this confession was crushing. Even Linda, for the first time, looked like she might crumble. Her spine had softened, her shoulders slumped just slightly, and her lips parted not to respond, but to breathe. Another guest, a middle-aged woman with striking silver hair, added her voice. We've all seen it. Some of us just chose not to admit it. You could feel it when you walked in, who mattered and who didn't, who got offered a drink, who got ignored, who was smiled at. It wasn't about money, it was about everything else. Marcus stood still through it all. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence was a catalyst, but the truth being uncovered belonged to everyone else now. What had been whispered in hallways and break rooms for years was finally out in the open, and with every voice that rose, the culture of the hotel cracked a little more. Linda slowly backed away from the center of the lobby. Her eyes met those of her former employees and found nothing there. No loyalty, no fear, only release. As she turned to leave, no one stopped her. No security escort, no dramatic exit. Just the soft sound of her heels on the marble, receding into the background she had once ruled. Daniel, the newly appointed acting manager, stood behind the desk, visibly shaken. Marcus stepped toward him and placed a hand on his shoulder. You don't have to fix it all today, he said quietly, but you start today. Daniel nodded, his throat tight. I will. Then Marcus faced the room once more. This hotel will change, he said, and not just in brochures or slogans. We will listen. We will record. We will be transparent. The time for closed doors and hidden files is over. He looked toward the staff. Your stories matter, not just because they're true, but because they should never have been hidden in the first place. The guests, too, seemed transformed. Those who had come expecting silk sheets and private check-ins had witnessed something raw and unscripted. Some stood. Others approached staff members to apologize. Several shook hands, exchanged names, offered support. Something invisible had shifted in the way people stood near each other, now less distance, more presence. In the aftermath, as the crowd slowly dispersed and the cameras were lowered, the lobby felt changed. It wasn't just a place of transaction anymore. It had become a place of reckoning, of unburdening, of rebuilding. The truth had filled the room like sunlight through a broken skylight, unexpected, uninvited, but desperately needed. And at the center of it stood Marcus Holloway, not as a billionaire or owner, but as a witness to the power of honesty. He had not raised his voice. He had not demanded revenge. He had simply held a mirror to a world that could no longer look away. By the time the first videos hit social media, the sun had barely risen over the skyline. The Grand Royal's lobby still echoed with the rawness of the night before. Its marble floors had been swept, the counters wiped, and the floral arrangements quietly replaced, as if to restore a sense of normalcy. But the air carried something else now, a quiet tremor that no polish could erase. Something permanent had shifted, and outside the hotel's walls the world had begun to notice. The footage was everywhere. From shaky smartphone recordings to live news broadcasts, the story unfolded in pieces. A black man quietly escorted out of a luxury hotel for looking out of place, only to return minutes later as its new owner, exposing years of racial bias and systemic abuse. Within hours, the hashtags began to rise. Marcus Moment, Hotel Truth, Luxury for All. Short clips circulated faster than they could be traced, each with millions of views. One video, capturing the exact moment Linda Caldwell's employee profile was deleted from the hotel's system, climbed to the #1 spot on video sharing platforms within the day. Commentators, influencers, celebrities, everyone had something to say. A well-known news anchor described the event as a silent revolution unfolding in real time. Civil rights groups praised Marcus's composure, calling it an act of leadership through restraint. But the most powerful voices came not from those in the spotlight, but from ordinary people who recognized their own stories in what had happened. Across social media, posts flooded in. Guests of Grand Royal hotels from around the world began recounting moments they'd buried or dismissed, stories of being ignored, overlooked, spoken to with disdain. Some shared experiences of being asked for additional identification when others weren't, of being offered less desirable rooms, or of hearing coded language from staff. A Filipino woman from San Diego described how she and her mother had been told to use the side entrance for easier check-in. A Nigerian businessman wrote that, during his stay in Paris, he was questioned twice about his room number while white guests were waved past. But it didn't stop at the guests. Former employees' maids, bellboys, receptionists began to speak up. They shared screenshots of internal emails, anonymous messages, performance evaluations riddled with bias. A former assistant manager posted about how she was told to be less assertive during meetings and warned against disrupting the comfort of legacy staff. And another wrote, "We were trained to smile at everyone, but not encouraged to see everyone equally." The Grand Royal brand was in the global spotlight, and the pressure built quickly. Shares of the parent company fluctuated wildly as investors braced for fallout. But Marcus remained calm, issuing no statements beyond the one he had already delivered in the lobby. Instead, he worked. Behind the scenes, he convened with his leadership team, legal counsel, and external ethics consultants. Within 24 hours, he scheduled a press conference, not to apologize, not to spin, but to define what would come next. That morning, the press assembled in a conference room on the top floor of the very hotel where the scandal had begun. It was a room usually reserved for elite corporate gatherings, but today it bore a new kind of importance. Reporters from across the globe sat in neat rows as Marcus approached the lectern, again dressed plainly, again without fanfare. He did not open with a speech. Instead, he played a video. It was a collage made overnight by his team. Snippets of testimony from guests and employees alike, subtitled and translated, played across the screen. Faces from all walks of life, speaking into webcams, phones, or quiet voice memos. Each voice was steady, each story heartbreakingly specific. A girl described being told she couldn't use the hotel pool because private events were scheduled, when she was the only person of color there. A bellhop recounted how he was ordered not to carry certain bags because the guests looked questionable. A father remembered watching his son, dressed in a suit, being asked to step aside for a security check during check-in. When the video ended, the room was silent. Marcus stepped forward. "We do not hide from this," he said. "We do not minimize it. We meet it." He then outlined a sweeping series of reforms, not just for the Grand Royal chain, but for the industry as a whole, because As he made clear, this wasn't about one hotel. It never had been. The announcement included the immediate formation of an independent auditing body tasked with reviewing all guest and employee complaints, the release of all past non-disclosure agreements related to discrimination, and the termination of policies that obscured disciplinary action against management. He introduced a new initiative, the Guest Dignity Index, a public scoring system that would allow customers to review hotels not just by stars or amenities, but by their inclusivity practices and ethical standards. Participating hotels would submit to regular inspections, mandatory diversity training, and open employee evaluations. Marcus pledged $10 million to launch the project and challenged competing hotel chains to match it. Then came the most controversial part of the press conference. "I will no longer be the silent owner," he said. "From now on, I will appear without announcement at any property that carries my name. No schedule, no red carpet, no suits or handlers. If luxury must be measured, let it be measured by how it treats those who are least expected to receive it." The room erupted with questions, but Marcus took only 3. Then he left. What followed was a wave. Other hotel chains scrambled to draft new mission statements. CEOs tweeted vague commitments to reflect and grow. But none could match the gravity of what had already been done. Marcus wasn't chasing headlines. He had triggered a cultural reckoning. Within days, television panels debated the implications. Universities hosted discussions on ethical leadership. A late-night talk show aired a segment titled "Luxury with a Conscience," featuring clips from Marcus's speech spliced with real testimonials. Opinion columns were written faster than they could be printed, dissecting what made his approach so effective: his restraint, his refusal to retaliate, his clarity of vision. He hadn't called for boycotts or destruction. He had exposed the rot and offered a blueprint for healing. And among the public, a new term began to take hold: Holloway Standard. People began using it in reviews. "The Holloway Standard was not met. This place needs a Holloway check." Even unrelated businesses adopted the phrase, proud to live up to it. In cities across the world, small boutique hotels began implementing their own codes of ethical conduct. Employee handbooks were revised. Guest services underwent retraining. Signs appeared in lobbies, quietly but powerfully echoing a message that had been spoken plainly, without marketing gloss. Dignity is not optional. At the Grand Royal, the changes were immediate. The lobby, now famous for its transformation, felt different. The staff stood taller, not because they feared hidden observers, but because they believed they were finally seen. A new poster hung near the reception desk, an image of Marcus, not in a suit, but in his original windbreaker, walking out of the hotel the first time. Below the image were the words, "Respect walks in quietly." Daniel, the acting manager, became a steady presence. He made no grand announcements but held weekly open forums where staff could voice concerns, suggest improvements, or simply be heard. Elena was promoted to guest relations coordinator. The hotel began hiring more diverse staff from surrounding communities. The unspoken code that had once divided guests and employees had been dismantled, brick by silent brick. Marcus himself did not return immediately. He knew better than to steal the spotlight from the people rebuilding on the ground. But he watched. He read every report. He listened to every story. And he planned. Because while the world applauded the moment, Marcus understood that moments alone do not build justice. They only open the door. The work, his work, had only just begun. Morning sunlight spilled over the marble floors of the Grand Royal, filtering through the tall windows and warming the lobby in golden light. The same lobby that had once been a stage for silent judgments and subtle exclusions now felt like a different place entirely. The scent of fresh lilies still floated in the air, but it mingled with the quiet hum of sincere conversation and the calm confidence of a staff finally working without fear. The memory of what had taken place there had not been erased, but it had been transformed. No longer a moment of shame, but a cornerstone of change. The front desk buzzed with gentle activity. Daniel, now wearing a nameplate that read General Manager, stood behind the counter in a crisp new suit. His expression was calm, his shoulders more assured than they had been just days ago. He greeted guests with the kind of welcome that did not need to be learned. It came from the simple conviction that people deserved to feel like they belonged. The staff, too, moved with a sense of ease that hadn't existed before. The morning team included Elena, now overseeing guest experience initiatives, walking through the lobby with a clipboard and a soft smile as she checked in on guests, exchanged greetings with the concierge, and stopped to help an elderly couple with directions. Near the entrance, a young bellhop joked with a family checking in, their toddler clutching a stuffed bear. There was laughter now, not the cautious kind that followed orders, but the natural sort that bubbled up between people who no longer had to weigh every gesture for approval. And the guests, they were different too. Not because they looked different, though they did. They came from every corner of the world, spoke in a dozen languages, wore suits and saris, jeans and caftans, carried camera bags and briefcases and backpacks with patches from every country. But the difference wasn't in what they wore or how they arrived. It was in how they were treated. For the first time in a long time, luxury at the Grand Royal felt unguarded, sincere, shared. A young couple from Mumbai sipped coffee in the lounge. An elderly man from Senegal read the morning news on a tablet. A woman from São Paulo, traveling alone on business, chatted with the concierge about local walking tours. Every interaction, no matter how small, carried the quiet weight of respect. It was no longer assumed, no longer optional. It was practiced, upheld, earned. At the heart of the lobby, mounted on the stone wall behind the front desk, hung a new plaque. Polished brass, carefully engraved, it caught the light with a soft glow. The words were simple, the letters elegant but bold. Luxury begins with respect. The statement had not come from a marketing team or a branding agency. It had been spoken by Marcus Holloway during his first televised address after the incident, and those 5 words had traveled farther than he ever expected. They now adorned entryways, websites, and social media banners across the hospitality industry. But here, at the hotel where it had all started, the plaque carried a different kind of meaning. It wasn't just a promise to the world. It was a promise to themselves. Behind the scenes, the work had not stopped. Staff were still in the middle of their newly implemented inclusivity training program. Weekly listening sessions were now a fixture of the Grand Royal's operations, not as performative gestures, but as genuine opportunities for reflection. Anonymous feedback forms sat at the front desk, right beside the complimentary bottled water, available to guests and staff alike. No security guards watched from the corners. No unspoken rules guided which guests received warmth and which were handled coldly. The entire foundation had been rebuilt. That afternoon, just as the clock struck 2, a black SUV pulled up discreetly to the front entrance. No one rushed out to greet it. No one had been told to expect anything. The driver exited, walked around the car, and opened the rear door with a quiet efficiency. Marcus stepped out, again dressed simply in a charcoal sweater, dark jeans, and leather shoes worn just enough to show they'd walked many miles. He wore no visible watch, no jewelry. His presence didn't declare itself, it settled. The doorman, who had started just a few days ago, did a double take, then straightened his posture. He recognized Marcus not from wealth or wardrobe, but from the conversations he'd overheard, the training videos, the stories that echoed through the break room. Without hesitation, he offered a warm smile. "Welcome back, Mr. Holloway," he said, his voice full of genuine warmth. Marcus nodded. "Thank you. It's good to be back." He stepped into the lobby, his eyes drifting over the polished floor, the familiar scent, the changed faces. A family passed by, 2 children tugging at their parents' hands as they hurried toward the elevators. An elderly woman approached the front desk to ask about shuttle service. No one paused. No one stared. And perhaps most importantly, no one filtered their welcome through assumptions. Daniel spotted Marcus and approached, his steps careful but unafraid. "Sir," he said, "we weren't expecting—" "I know," Marcus replied, cutting him off with a small smile. "That's the point." Daniel nodded slowly, the meaning settling in. "Would you like a tour?" Marcus looked around. "No need. I see what I need right here." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the flow of the lobby. An old man being guided to the restaurant by a young hostess, a guest laughing at something a bellhop said, Elena crouching to help a child tie her shoe. Every action held the quiet dignity that Marcus had always believed hospitality should carry. "I'll only be a moment," Marcus said, patting Daniel on the shoulder. He walked across the lobby to the wall where the plaque hung. He stood in front of it, reading the words again. Not because he had forgotten them, but because they meant more now than they had when he first spoke them. He didn't need a speech. He didn't call for a meeting. There was no audience, no cameras, no applause. Instead, Marcus turned slowly, walked toward the doors, and stepped out into the afternoon sun. He paused just outside, pulling out his phone. The line connected instantly. "Put Miami on the calendar," he said. "Next week, no announcement. I want to see it for myself." He ended the call without waiting for confirmation, then slid the phone back into his coat pocket. The city stretched before him, bright, noisy, alive. And as he walked down the sidewalk away from the hotel, Marcus knew this wasn't the end. It wasn't a resolution to be celebrated or a scandal to be forgotten. It was a foundation, a line drawn, a standard set. Because true change isn't just declared, it's tested time and again in the quiet, invisible moments when no one is looking. And Marcus Holloway would be looking. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Click to watch more powerful stories like this, and don't forget to share this video with someone who needs to see it.